Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a review of the 1980s movie Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes. And so I know a lot of people like this movie. I know a lot of critics love the movie. I know a lot of people do the award show nominations like the movie. And I do respect all the work that went into it, all the craft, and there's a tremendous legacy of people who worked very hard to bring Tarzan to both the small screen and the large screen, and absolutely respect that, and I'm glad all of it happened, even if sometimes I don't really care for the result, and that's kind of what happened with Greystoke. I didn't like the movie as a teenager, and I don't like it today as an adult. It was advertised as a movie that was going to be extremely faithful to the roots of Tarzan and was going to kind of bring him back to greatness. And the first half of the movie actually does try to do a direct adaptation of Tarzan of the Apes. However, the last half of the movie is completely not related to the novel at all and is the antithesis of Tarzan. So how did this happen? So Greystoke started out as this legendary script by Robert Towne that had not been completed, but everyone in Hollywood was abuzz about it. That would make a great movie. The Burrs estate was behind it. And, Robert Towne was very passionate about doing something very close to the novels. And he'd actually decided he was going to direct it because, most of the scenes during Tarzan's childhood had no dialogue, and that was going to be a very challenging thing to direct. So he knew his own vision. He was going to sit there and do his passion project himself. So what happened was he had another movie he deeply loved that he was trying to get made, and he did not have the money to do it. And so he sold the script, The Greystoke, to the studio, and so another director was brought in and another producer and all this, and they finished the script. And so what you got was a movie very different from Robert Towne's vision. Towne actually had them use his dog's name in place of his own for the screenwriting credit, and so it did get nominated for an Oscar for Best Screenplay, and so that's the first time a dog has been nominated for an Oscar. Towne would say that it was his biggest creative regret that he let go of Greystoke. So let me start off by saying some nice things about the movie. Things I enjoyed. First of all, this launched the career of Christopher Lambert. He was a relative unknown until then. And of course, he would go on to star in Highlander. He was a perfect Tarzan. Just visually, he just looked like he walked straight out of the novels. This could have been the best Tarzan movie ever made if they had gotten the story right. Another thing I enjoyed is the cinematography. It is amazing looking. The Greystoke estate looks awesome. It is just beautifully shot. It is shot in Africa for the jungle scenes, and it looks wonderful. There's a few seconds in there you actually get to see some real animals, which is nice. I wish it was more, but better than nothing. They do guys in suits for the apes, and the apes look great, and they do a fantastic job. I mean, just kudos to those guys. It was super hard to act in those costumes. They'd have to take a break every, I think it was 10 minutes or something, because they'd get too hot in them. So kudos to all the apes. And there was things from the novels that I was just geeking out at, seeing on the screen, Tarzan entering his parents' cabin and discovering his father's hunting knife. Tarzan, when Lambert first appeared, you see he's wearing the locket straight out of the novel. He has the scar on his forehead from the novels, which is so cool. I just wish it was in a movie that had more resembled the novels. But I think probably for what it is, it's well made. It is not an action-adventure story. Tarzan is an action-adventure franchise. He is a man who was raised by apes and discovers he's human and learns how to be a human being in the novels. And so he combines the intelligence and nobility of a man with the strengths and instincts of an animal, to be this ultimate action hero who fights in two world wars, and he overthrows dictators, he fights monsters, he fights dinosaurs. I mean, just all this really cool stuff. But the Tarzan in this movie is none of those things. What they decided to do instead was to do a cynical, realistic drama where someone who is raised in the wilderness without human contact is discovered by humans and is developmentally stunted because of that. And he just can't adjust to civilization. He can't get past the fact that he was raised by animals and has to be returned to the wild at the end of the movie. It's not Tarzan, it's the sad tale of Monkey Boy. And there's nothing wrong with the sad tale of Monkey Boy. That's going to appeal to a lot of people. But A, it's not Tarzan, and B, it's not something I would normally watch myself. It's just not my cup of tea. And so obviously I have big issues with the way the movie ended, but I also have some problems with the first part too. I think probably a lot of that is because we ended up with another director than the person who originally envisioned the project. And also that director has stated that about 25 minutes of jungle footage was omitted from that period of Tarzan's life. And so I got a feeling a lot of the issues I'm about to talk about probably would have been helped by those deleted scenes. So as the movie starts, we're introduced to Whitebeard, as the credits call him. This, I thought was Kerchak. Unfortunately, the nature of the movie not having words at the beginning does create some confusion. I thought that Whitebeard was the leader of the pack, especially because they had Whitebeard doing a lot of things Kerchak does in the novels and also did in the Disney movie too. But actually, Whitebeard is Tarzan's adoptive father. In the novels, he would be called Tublat. He is actually a much nicer character here, and that plays out, of course, at the end. The actual real leader of the tribe of apes is, in the credits, called White Eyes, but this would be Kerchak in the novels. And I got really confused because he just didn't appear in a way that made him distinct from the other apes for me. So where Kerchak, or White Eyes, I'll call him White Eyes, appears is when Tarzan discovers the cabin and is leaving it, he's the one who attacks Tarzan. In the novels, it was a random Bolgani, which is a gorilla. I couldn't tell him from Adam when he attacked Tarzan, so I thought it was just a random gorilla like in the novels. But no, that was actually the leader of the tribe. And so when Tarzan recovers, the ape that he's urinating on, which was actually a really cool scene, is White Eyes. And so, of course, the part at which I figured out that White Eyes was the leader was, when he banished Tarzan's ape dad. And then Tarzan, fought him for leadership of the tribe. And that is White Eyes. Unfortunately, this is, one of the problems with the movie is that they completely take out the jungle action. Now, okay, that's a problem for me. As far as the movie they're making goes, it makes sense. It's a drama. There shouldn't be, these big prolonged action scenes, and there's not. Tarzan just shows up with the panther already dead in the scene, completely skipping that fight scene, which is a shame. It's crazy to think that a G-rated Disney movie was able to give us better jungle action than a PG-rated live-action movie. The fight scene involving White Eyes is very, very brief, and of course it is resolved underwater. Now, this may not have been the fault of the filmmakers because it is a PG movie and they didn't have the option of PG-13 back then. So that may have been the reason why they couldn't show the action. It may have been too much for the ratings board. That seems kind of crazy because obviously Tarzan has gotten in some really epic animal fights in previous movies, and there were some bloody, cringy kind of scenes in there, like with Paul Darno. I'm sorry, I've mispronounced his name all these years, and I just learned how to say it from this movie. But anyway, he pulls out these bloody arrows, and like, ooh, if they could do that, they should have been able to do the animal fights. But what do I know? So the scene in the cabin, as I said, was kind of a thrill, but it was also kind of a disappointment because instead of discovering the books that Tarzan in the novels would learn to read from, he would figure out what language was and teach himself to read, and that would be his bridge to humanity. This would be where he would realize, I am not a deformed hairless ape. I am a man, and start understanding what that meant. Instead, it's just he looks at this little children's play toy block, and it's like one says ape and one says man, and he's just confused by it. So Paul Darno, and I actually pronounced it correctly that time, Tarzan's best friend and the person who teaches him how to speak French and English, is actually in the movie. He's normally edited out of most versions of The Origin that reached a screen. So it was kind of cool to see him in here. For some reason, they changed him to Danish and gave him the first name Felipe. I don't understand the changes in this movie at all from the novel. His character is actually the closest one to the novel of everyone in this movie. And in my opinion, he's the most likable character too. The movie does a good job of developing their friendship, and on the way back to civilization, there's the scene in the bar, which also illustrates, this is not an action movie. Instead of Tarzan fighting the guys who attack Darno, he growls and scares them away, and then, for reasons I don't understand, picks up a lamp and says, "Fire!" and then sets the whole place on fire, and it goes up like a massive inferno the next time we see it. And I'm just like, why in the name of God did Tarzan just do that? Did they have like a demand from the studio that something needed to be put on fire or something in the movie? It just made no sense. And then we get to Jane, who I'm just really scratching my head and trying to figure out why in the world they did what they did with her. So in this movie, she is still from Baltimore, but somehow she is a ward of the Earl of Greystoke, who is Tarzan's grandfather. This is never explained. I don't understand it. She's completely removed from his origin. She has no jungle scenes. He does not meet her until he gets to the Greystoke estate, and we get into that part of the story that has nothing to do with the novels. And Jane seems to be in a relationship with this lord of something or another named Charles. And, if you have a different interpretation of, how she greets Charles when he gets out of his car that first time, let me know. But I don't have any other explanation as to why she was touching him and the way she was. And so when she meets Tarzan, he comes on to her, and she doesn't have any problem with him kissing her at all. And then she just tells Charles, like, hey, I don't love you, and ends up just falling in love with Tarzan without any consequences, without any hesitancy or second guessing. And this is the opposite of how this character is normally portrayed, and honestly how romance is normally portrayed, period, in pop culture. Normally there is that whole, thing that people go through where they're like, oh, I really like that person, but do they like me? Do they really like me? Or am I imagining that? Am I wrong about this? Should I be with them? All that stuff, that characters normally go through that creates drama and suspense and helps you identify with them is not here. And I just didn't really get into their relationship that much either. Usually that's one of my favorite parts of the Tarzan story. But I don't know, it just felt like it was a relationship of convenience. I mean, at the end, Tarzan just didn't seem all that heartbroken to leave her. I just couldn't understand why there wasn't some kind of conflict within Tarzan. Like, oh my God, I love Jane and I got to leave her to go back to the jungle. It's like, no, it's just like, bye. And to make things even weirder, when you're hearing Jane's voice in the movie, it is not the voice of the actress. The actress is from South Carolina, and they apparently didn't like her voice, and so they dubbed all of her lines over with Glenn Close. And according to the actress, she worked with a speech coach and all this stuff to, get rid of her southern accent. And nobody ever told her they had an issue with it until the director sat her down and was like, hey, we're going to dub over all your lines. And so the last half of the movie essentially just deteriorates into Tarzan just randomly acting like an ape at various points. That is just really bizarre and at times silly. I mean, I just didn't have any explanation as to why, just all of a sudden he would start acting like an ape. It's just weird. I mean, the scene at the end with Whitebeard was just strange beyond words. I mean, I'm just like, this is not a Tarzan movie. I mean, it's just, Tarzan seemed just very simple minded in a way that just felt weird. And the scene where he's tangled up in the fishing wire and he's like, I like fishing, Grandpa. Oh, God. I had to pause it. I cringed so badly. And I think it's just a tragic movie. I mean, they had all the right pieces in place to make a great, great Tarzan movie and really relaunch the character as a major franchise again. And instead, they just decided to do this one-off artsy movie that, would please critics, but could not be followed up on and would not create, the kind of franchise that Tarzan had had for decades and decades in both the novels and the movies. So I wasn't the only one who had mixed feelings about this movie. The Burroughs estate also wasn't happy. In this interview given in the 90s, in the back of Tarzan Lost Adventures, issue 2, Danton Burroughs' grandson, said that, they really did like Robert Towne's vision, but unfortunately, once he left the project, a producer came in and just had a completely different vision that they did not care for that second half of the movie. And even back when it was released, I think the Burroughs estate may have thrown some shade at it too. So back in the 80s, if you had a blockbuster movie that was going to come out, Marvel was going to do a movie adaptation in their Marvel Super Special. And so, they had, just every big movie you can think of at the time, probably a bunch you can't think of, had these. This is like frickin' Blade Runner. And so they would do a movie adaptation and, beautiful artwork and all that stuff. And they'd also throw in like photos and stuff from the movie, which would be really, really cool. So a Marvel Super Special of Tarzan did come out in 1984 when Greystoke was released, but it was not an adaptation of the movie. It was an adaptation of the novel Tarzan of the Apes. And Marvel used to put out a comic book magazine called Marvel Age about their comics that they were putting out. And in an article promoting this, they said that both this special and the movie cover Tarzan's life from his birth to him killing Kerchak and becoming the leader of his tribe. Seems like the movie kind of went a little further than that. Seems like there was a bit after that. And so if you're wondering if it's a coincidence, I actually got, when Marvel did Tarzan incorrect in my Tarzan reading recommendations video, it actually ended in 1979. It actually ran from 77 to 79 when Marvel did Tarzan. And so this was 1984. And as far as I can tell, this was probably the only Tarzan comic published in America in the 80s. So this was published, it doesn't really feel like a movie tie-in so much as it is a rebuttal of the movie. And as far as I can tell, there was nothing produced to tie into the movie. There were no toys, there was no merchandise, there was no souvenir magazine. I can find nothing to tie into Greystoke. Because, to be honest with you, it just wasn't that type of movie. And I think that is a shame, because there wouldn't be another Tarzan movie made again until the 90s. And I feel like, you just missed out on an entire generation of kids. I grew up in the 80s. I would have been the target demographic for Tarzan as a child. But I was barely aware the character even existed. I had no idea what Tarzan was really like until I got to being a teenager and they started doing the Dark Horse comics. And of course, that was part of a big push with the Tarzan, the Epic Adventure series on TV and the toys and all that. And that's how I discovered Tarzan. And the only reason I watched this movie was when I discovered it, I actively looked for, Tarzan stuff to watch. And I watched the Greystoke and I'm like, what? And that's my thoughts on Greystoke. I'm very happy for the people who liked it, but I just feel like it's a real shame to have to go back to the silent movie era to see, movies based on the actual novels. However, there was a movie that came out in recent years that got it really close and was actually really enjoyable. So join me next time for my review of The Legend of Tarzan. See ya.